Paul Walker was not supposed to take that exit off the highway that afternoon, but something in his chest told him to slow down and look at the man standing alone under the bridge holding a cardboard sign. But when he read the shaking handwriting on that sign and saw the tired eyes behind it, his hands froze on the steering wheel, because the homeless man standing on the side of the road was the same person who had pulled him out of a burning car when he was just 16 years old. The afternoon sun hung low over the California desert, painting the highway in soft orange light as Paul Walker drove his silver pickup truck back home from a long week of filming in the mountains. The air inside the cabin smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil, and the radio was turned down to a quiet hum. His phone buzzed with messages from his manager, from his stunt coordinator, from his sister Ashley, but he ignored all of them. Sometimes a man just needs the road and his own thoughts, and that afternoon Paul needed both more than he wanted to admit. He had been thinking about his daughter Meadow the whole drive, wondering if she was getting home from school all right, wondering if he was doing enough as a father in between the movies, the premieres, and the endless airports. The thoughts weighed on him, sitting heavy in his chest the way only parental guilt can sit. He had not planned to take the exit near Palmdale, but his hand moved the steering wheel before his mind caught up. Something about the way the light hit the overpass made him slow down, and then he saw him. A man was standing just off the shoulder of the road, thin and weathered, wearing a torn brown coat that was far too heavy for the desert heat. His beard was long and gray, and his face was lined with the kind of deep creases that only come from years of sleeping under open skies. In his hands, held with a kind of tired dignity, was a cardboard sign. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. "Anything helps. Veteran, God bless." Paul pulled onto the shoulder and put the truck in park, and he sat there for a long moment with both hands on the wheel, studying the stranger through the windshield. There was something about the man that caught his attention, something familiar in the slope of his shoulders, and the way he held his head slightly tilted to the left, as if he had spent his whole life listening for something no one else could hear. Paul felt his pulse quicken. He reached for his wallet, thinking he would hand the man some cash and drive on like anyone else would, but as he stepped out of the truck and walked closer, his breath caught in his throat. The scar, the long white scar that ran from the man's temple down to his jaw, pale against the sunburned skin. Paul knew that scar. He had stared at it from a hospital bed almost 20 years ago, in the days after the accident that should have killed him. His name was Daniel Hayes. He had been a volunteer firefighter in the small town outside of Glendale where Paul had grown up, and on a cold December night when Paul was 16 years old, Daniel had run into a burning Mustang with no protective gear and pulled a teenage boy out of the driver's seat seconds before the gas tank exploded. That teenage boy was Paul. And Daniel Hayes had walked away from the hospital the next morning without ever leaving his name, without waiting for thanks, without asking for anything in return. Paul's parents had tried to find him for years, writing letters, making phone calls, driving out to addresses that turned out to be empty lots, but Daniel had simply vanished into the country somewhere between Arizona and Nevada, swallowed up by the kind of quiet life that does not leave a paper trail. And now here he was, standing on the side of a California highway with everything he owned wrapped in a torn plastic bag at his feet, alone and forgotten by a world that should have built statues for what he had done that night. Daniel did not recognize Paul at first. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that sleep cannot fix, and he only looked up when Paul stepped close enough to cast a shadow over his sign. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Anything you can spare, sir. I am just trying to get to Bakersfield by Sunday to see my sister before she passes away." Paul could not speak. His throat had closed completely, and for a long moment the only sound was the distant rush of cars passing on the freeway above them. A hawk circled somewhere in the pale blue sky overhead, and the smell of dry sagebrush drifted in from the open desert. Finally, Paul pulled off his sunglasses and looked the older man directly in the eyes. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, "my name is Paul Walker. I do not know if you remember me, but in December of 1991, you pulled a 16-year-old boy out of a burning car on Foothill Boulevard just outside of Glendale. That boy was me." For a few seconds, Daniel Hayes just stared, and then his weathered face began to crumble in slow pieces. His lips trembled, and the cardboard sign slipped from his fingers and landed on the dusty pavement between them. He took a shaky step backward, shaking his head slowly as if trying to wake up from a dream he did not deserve to be having. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Oh my God, son, you grew up! You actually grew up!" And then the old firefighter who had once run into a burning car without hesitation began to weep openly, standing on the side of a California highway with his hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking silently, as Paul Walker reached out and pulled him into the tightest embrace of his entire life. They stood there for a long time on the shoulder of that empty road, two strangers tied together by one terrible night and one impossible miracle, and neither of them cared who drove by or who saw them crying in the orange glow of the setting desert sun that quiet afternoon. When Paul finally pulled back, he kept one steady hand on the older man's shoulder, and he felt Daniel trembling beneath the thin torn coat, as fragile as the cardboard sign that still lay forgotten in the dust at their feet. Daniel tried to speak, but his voice kept breaking apart, kept folding in on itself, kept turning into small hoarse sounds that were neither words nor sobs, but something quieter and far more broken than either of those things could ever truly be out loud. And Paul, the grown man who had once been that terrified 16-year-old trapped behind a cracked steering wheel, simply held on tighter and refused to let go for anything in this world. That evening, Paul drove Daniel to a quiet inn off the highway and paid for a hot meal and a warm bed. Over dinner, Daniel spoke about the wife he had lost to cancer, about the small pension that had run dry faster than anyone had warned him it would, and about the years that had slipped through his fingers. Paul listened without interrupting, the way a son listens to a father, and when Daniel finally finished speaking, Paul said only 4 quiet words. "You are not alone." Within 1 week, Daniel had a small apartment in Santa Clarita, a steady job at an automotive shop, and a monthly handwritten letter from Meadow Walker. If this story moved you even a little, please hit that like button right now, because every single like helps stories like this reach the people who need them the most. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell, because every week we share real, untold, and emotional stories about the quiet heroes who change lives without ever asking for anything in return. Drop a comment below and tell us this. Is there someone in your life who once saved you, someone you never got the chance to properly thank? Share their name in the comments, because every hero deserves to be remembered out loud.